Happy New Year! It's me, Sonomi-kan, your mom, or mommy. Choose wisely. For a while, I've wanted to branch out from just streaming, and by for a while, I mean like 2 or 3 years. So, I've been thinking about topics that I'd like to do videos on, kicking around lists, half finished scripts, all of that jazz. And while I'll probably do some tokusatsu videos, some videos on VTubing and tutorials, I wanted to touch on a decades-long gaming mystery that I find myself thinking back on pretty regularly. The fountain in Peach's courtyard in Super Mario 64. Or more specifically, the plaque that sits below the fountain's decorative star. The two most common readings that you'll see come up are, of course, Eternal Star and the legendary L is Real 2401. That cryptic message that everyone believed was the instructions to unlock Luigi as playable in Super Mario 64 in the late 90s. And while I was deeply enamored with the way the Gigaleak worked out to Luigi being found in Mario 64's data 24 years and 1 month later, I want to raise a suggestion that I've never seen come up in any videos on the subject. The sign wasn't written in English. It was written in Japanese. The game was developed by Nintendo, a Japanese company, in Japan, by a small, almost entirely Japanese team, by which, of all credits I can find, had an entirely Japanese cast of artists. So all signs point to the plaque's text being written in the native language of the game, Japanese. Now, when we were young, there's no reason we would have considered the sign wouldn't be in English. I'm not calling anyone dumb for not thinking of it. I honestly did not think of this until a handful of years ago. The game is in English. Like, we played it in English as kids, and in 1996, when it came out, I was still in single digits and barely had a concept of other languages at all, much less the process of game localization and altering text and textures from one language to another. It's such an inconsequential thing that what we're really remembering all these years later are the playground rumors and the weird ways you were supposed to do it and the fun we had trying to make it happen. There's even the infamous letter from Nintendo of America saying that L is Real was just a joke from the programmers. But I don't think this is really a reliable statement. Even setting aside that the person drafting the letter was likely using developer and programmer interchangeably, since in a studio setting, the programmer is almost certainly not also handling textures for 3D models, Nintendo of America likely wouldn't have bothered contacting Nintendo of Japan over something so trivial that they were telling to one person, and probably didn't expect in 1996 that the internet would become what it is now, resulting in the letter being passed around to every Nintendo fan on Earth 30 years later. And I'm sure that most Nintendo YouTubers discussing the topic are just attempting to revel in the joy of that nostalgia more than anything. I'm not calling them stupid. I'm not saying their videos are bad. It's just for the joy of it, and I get that. And maybe this is a thing that other people have realized, and I'm just the one that needs to shout it into the void. But every video I see to this day just talks about the sign very specifically as if it's written in English. Even in a nearly 2-hour-long, absolutely wonderful retrospective on the game released in September of 2022, Liam Triforce nostalgically remembers L is Real, but never brings up the possibility of the sign being in another language entirely. And look, I'm not going to be solving this mystery today. I'm just some silly little guy with 500-ish YouTube subs at the time I'm making this video. I'm not a big YouTuber who can swing contacts at Nintendo and make some kind of multi-hour long deep dive on this topic. But I want to try to at least start the conversation getting to the real root of this sign's message and lay down a foundation so that, I don't know, maybe someone with a few more resources can pick up where I left off. And I hear you. I do. Sono, you say. Sono mikan. Mother. Mommy. If they translated the game into English, why wouldn't they translate the sign? And I, holding your beautiful face in my hands, respond gently, Viewer, my dove, my darling, the sign is illegible. And of course it is. If it wasn't, we wouldn't have been having this debate since 1996. Like, naturally, they'd translate the dialogue text, the text boxes of what signs say when you interact with them, Peach's letter. But if the plaque itself, and the textures on every other sign in Super Mario 64 for that matter, had the text on their actual texture changed between languages, there would be a different texture in the Japanese and English versions of the game. But there isn't. And that's because the sign is so illegible and has no related readable in-game text. Like, you can't walk up to the fountain, press A, and get information. That there's no reason to bother with an alternate translated texture, the way that a studio would for a more modern, high-resolution game that has things you can read. So, if we're gonna do this, let's start at the beginning. Now, most of the discrepancy between El is Real and Eternal Star is based on the shape of that very first letter on the plaque. The only one that really is even anything close to legible. Because you see, it's kind of an odd letter. It's easy to get the idea of an L from it. You've got a vertical stroke going down and ending, meeting with the horizontal stroke at the bottom, which is where you would get an L. But there's also the odd case of there looking like there is another horizontal stroke toward the center of that vertical one, from which it's then easy to assume, oh, it must be an E. And the otherwise general illegibility and low resolution of the texture makes the rest so obscure that your brain fills in the blanks with shapes you know, which is how we get Eternal Star and El is Real. But let me present to you what I believe that letter actually is. It is the kanji ue, a letter that fits exactly the shape on the plaque, and I'm using the term letter loosely here, just bear with me. It is a vertical stroke that meets a bottom horizontal stroke perpendicular in the middle, and then a shorter horizontal stroke midway up the vertical, which I do not believe is the proper stroke order, but bear with me. Now, ue translates to over, or on top of, or above, depending on context. As mentioned, in Super Mario 64, there's no readable message associated with the plaque, so we can't get any hints as to what the intended message could have been from Japanese dialogue text. The most we can assume is that it has to do with the fact that it's on a statue of a star. Now, I'm not fluent in Japanese at all. I'm barely even coherent in it. I'm coming at this with some basic textbook knowledge and a couple years of community college study. But the way Japanese grammar is structured, I believe a phrase like the stars above would be written as ue no hoshi, with ue as the first character in the phrase, which is another reason that I believe the first character is ue rather than an L or an E. It's also entirely possible that the second character that most people are reading as is, or the TE in Eternal, is in fact the hiragana no. It is also possible that the 2 in 2401 is in fact not a 2, but the katakana ko. And to my eyes, 24 looks like ko followed by a chompu, which signifies elongating the vowel sound. And then the katakana for do, which would create the word kodo, or code. And if I'm correct about any of this, which trust me is a big if, it would mean that the two discernible words on this plaque are above and code. And I have no idea what context you could make out of that, due to the rest of it being completely unreadable. But above and code are two really fascinating words to be in there. Just as an aside, while in Ocarina of Time, the message that comes up when reading the plaque in Japanese doesn't contain the kanji ue, as the message reads pretty similar in Japanese as it does to English, and mostly refers to the big Dodongo skull and having to ignite the lights in its eyes. The texture itself was first developed for Super Mario 64 several years earlier, and then reused in Ocarina of Time. And perhaps since the plaque was placed in an elevated location, maybe the developers hoped that the kanji ue would act as a subtle hint to drop the bombs from the bridge above the skull, but that's just me making guesses. I have no idea. All I'm doing here today is making guesses, gang. I'd also like to take into consideration that most modern analysis is taking the raw, low-res texture or footage from modern ports or emulation of Super Mario 64, which is a valid choice because it's a good, clear way to get a look at the texture. But the Nintendo 64 was in the era of when televisions and monitors were still primarily CRTs as opposed to modern LED, OLED displays. And in older 2D pixel games, the art was styled in such a way that the low-resolution blur of a CRT would blend pixels into smooth, seemingly more detailed or nuanced artwork. There are tons of videos about this on YouTube, and it's extremely fascinating. And while Mario 64 is primarily low-poly modeled 3D, it's reasonable to assume that more detailed textures, such as a plaque or sign with text on it, are also generally intended to be smoothed, quote-unquote, by a CRT display, and the N64's inherent anti-aliasing. I thought maybe I could try and look at Mario 64's Japanese text font table, which I found on hack64.net and spritersresource.com, and kind of try to match the vague shapes to the blurry plaque, but the table itself only contains hiragana and katakana. This makes sense since Mario is a children's game, and writing primarily in hiragana and katakana would be easier for younger players to read. But since the plaque, if it's written in Japanese, the first word on the sign ue would be written in kanji, we can't be sure what else on the sign is or isn't, and thus would not be on the font table. So this avenue of attack ended up pretty much fruitless. Weirdly, though not really relevant, the Japanese font table does have English alphabet characters on it, but the English font table is an entirely separate, different font from the English characters on the Japanese table, which I didn't expect, and has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I still think it's interesting. For now, it's kind of impossible to truly decipher and translate the whole sign because the texture itself is at such a low resolution. I had truly hoped that during the Giga Leak we would perhaps find the original high-resolution image used for this texture, especially since so many other textures have been found. the skybox for Wet Dry World, the reflection for Metal Mario, and I know neither of those came from the Giga Leak itself and were discovered through other searching. They're just the best examples I can think of pieces of Mario 64 imagery that have been discovered elsewhere. Many textures in the game apparently come from Sozai Jiten, which is a Japanese asset library, as well as things that came with SGI workstations. Sozai Jiten used to have previews of the libraries available online when I started writing this script, but has since taken them down. When they were all up, I actually dug through a large amount, though not all of the Sozai Jiten files that were released pre-1996, and I wasn't able to find the texture itself. Fortunately, the folks at the Render 96 wiki, a GitHub page collecting texture sources, are much smarter than me, or at the very least far more stubborn, and managed to find the Sozai Jiten image that is used as the base of the star statue plaque. It's a simple brushed metal texture from Sozai Jiten Volume 3 Metal and Rust that's rotated 45 degrees. And since the base of the plaque is a texture from this library, the text itself was likely superimposed by whatever artist was handling those textures. And unfortunately, this means that there is likely not a higher resolution version anywhere outside of Nintendo's archives. And if it wasn't in the Giga Leak, then I don't know where John Nintendo has stashed it away, or if it even exists at all anymore. Hopefully one day we'll get access to a readable version of this texture and be able to find the real message that's been in Peach's courtyard for all these decades. I personally think that message will be closer to Eternal Star than L is real, but when we do find it, I think we'll have to translate it from Japanese to English to get that message. So, thanks for dipping into this mystery with me. And if you've got an insight on what some other text on the plaque might be, or if there are other things you'd like to hear me talk about, I'd love to hear them in the comments. You can also catch me on Twitch at Karate Bug Mom. I'm usually on Thursdays, Fridays, and Sundays at 3 p.m. Eastern. I hope to see you again very soon to talk about something else that's new and fun. I love you all very, very much, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful 2026.